according to my camera, it says that I am live. So put in the chat if you can hear me and just tell me where you're from. I see Sylvia is in the comments. I see Carol and Maureen. So tell me where you're from. Awesome. I see Christine is on there and Betty. Welcome everybody. This is lesson 5 from the Gnome of the Month. This is a lesson on smooth applique. So I'm so super excited that I was able to be here live. We had a change in schedule, so here I am. I hope that you can hear me loud and clear. I've got my mic on and it says it's okay, and everything should be ready to go and ready to learn about smooth edge applique. Awesome. I see we got quite a few people on here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. For those of you who are new and they've never been to one of our live streams, my name is Yvonne and this is the Jelly Roll Club. Welcome to lesson 5, the Gnome of the Month. Let me go through the supplies that I'm going to use and then we'll jump right into our lesson on smooth edge applique. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. If you are not a subscriber, don't forget to hit the subscribe bell. And if you like this lesson or any of our other lessons, don't forget to let us know by giving us a thumbs up. And so let me switch camera views and we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. I see Lynn is here. Hi, Lynn. All right. So on the website, you can find this pattern set and it says May Gnome of the Month. And let me go through really quick and show you what you've got. You have Florin and you have Florinda, and that's his little friend. So Florin is a happy little baby gnome. He's sitting down. He doesn't have little hands because they're tucked under his beard. But if you wanted to add hands, you could. You could use the little feet and make little hands to stick out, or you could put a little heart in his beard like the other gnomes and give him hands. But this is Florinda and this is Florin. So welcome. You have drawings that are reversed. So I took all of the drawings that I make and then I flip them mirror image so that if you're doing fusible, you can still do fusible. And my suggestion is if you're new to applique, that you try to stick with one method all the way through and then use the other methods on scrap pieces or practice before you try those. So fusible people, I have drawn all of these in reverse for fusible. This is the watercolor teapot. This will be in a different episode. I'm going to show you how to do the watercolor teapot when I do an entire episode on needle turn. So today is smooth edge, which is not the same as needle turn. And then you should have some extra flowers. These are bonus content. I'm not going to use them yet. And then you have the pieces for those of you who want to do fusible for the flowers. And so this is the dirt pile. These are the leaves for the pansy. And just like this pansy has like 3 petals, I separated the petals out for you. And so this is everything that you should have in your pattern set. Okay, so let's talk about smooth edge applique. There are 3 or 4 different ways to achieve what is called smooth edge applique. Some people will do the starch method like I did back in February, and I showed you guys how to do the starch method. But other people might want to do something called the basted method, and the basted method requires you to cut out some type of template. In this case, I used template plastic. I'm going to talk about template plastic for a second because I like using this for smaller pieces, right? So smooth edge applique, it depends on the size of the piece and the shape of the piece that you're using. And so for smaller pieces, I tend to use this method I'm showing you that I've shown you before, and then I use the no melt mylar template plastic. So this is a template plastic that you can actually iron, so it won't melt if you use heat. You can also use cardboard for this method because you can press cardboard and it will not cause any problem. So you can either buy a plastic or you can use cardboard. But you start by tracing the shape. In this case, I traced the foot and made it a tiny bit bigger. And then you take the fabric, and as you can see, I'm going to zoom in so you can see what I've done. And I did basting stitches. I did them in pink so you can see those. And then what I did is I took my needle and just made great big basting stitches, and I left 2 loose tails on here. So I laid my shape down, and I just cut about a 1/2 inch extra, and then I ran basting strips all the way around, and then when I'm ready to create my little shoe, I can just pull that out, put it on my little tomato here out of my way, and I'm going to hold it down and pull. Can you guys see that? And this is how I tend to do little small circles. And this is also how I tend to do little tiny ovals or anything that's kind of circular or roundish. And now that's really, really, really tight. You see that? And so that is one of my shoes. And I can leave all of this excess fabric. It won't hurt anything. And then once I have it like this, I have 2 options. I'm going to pull it really tight. At this point, I can starch this piece and let it dry, or I can just simply hit it with an iron. Great big iron. And because this is no heat mylar, it doesn't matter. And I've played with this before, and I've done single thread like this, or I've done double thread like this, and I find that double thread works better because I can pull it a lot tighter, okay? And so that's one type of smooth edge applique. And then when I'm done, I simply remove this piece out of here after that has set, and I can tighten it a little bit again for it to get its shape. And I'm going to bring my iron back over here and just set the iron down. And this is great if you're doing a project that has leaf shapes or lots of circles or ovals. This is a great, great skill to have an applique skill. This is also great if you're doing a Dresden project and you're doing that circle that goes in the middle of the Dresden. This method works really, really, really great for closing that center. And as you can tell, this is fairly smooth, right? There's a tiny little piece here, but I can fix that when I'm sewing. And so this right here is one method of doing smooth edge applique, and now this little shoe is ready to sew. And just so that I can repeat my steps again, I took a piece of mylar, this is plastic, that's heat resistant, and I'm going to lay it on some fabric. My applique fabric has been washed and not starched, because for any type of smooth edge applique, it works better if you wash your fabric and then do not starch it. And again, I just did some basting stitches, some great big basting stitches, and I'm going to pull this tight. Look at that. Just pull it really, really tight. And it leaves it nice and smooth, as you can see on those edges. And then I'm just going to press that with my iron. And I can press it either from the front or I can press it from the back. And I can starch it or leave it without starch. Either way, it doesn't matter. Does anybody have any questions about using the template method for preparing your smooth edge pieces? Is everybody pretty clear on this method? And there you have it. I have 2 little shoes now, and I can set those aside. All right, so let's talk about different types of smooth edge applique, okay? Fusible applique, we've gone over several times, and you know what that is at this point, right? So this is my method. I haven't fused him all the way, but my method has fusible only on the outside edges, not on the centers. And then I don't fuse everything down because right here I haven't fused it down because I'm going to fuse the background, and so I leave that unfused, and then I fuse it in sections. Like this is not fused yet because I wanted you to see it. And so fusible is very flat, right? But for fusible, you have to make sure that you come in and you use some type of decorative stitch, either a zigzag, a satin stitch, or a straight stitch all the way around to keep your shapes anchored to the background, right? Smooth edge is the same way in that we have to anchor it to the background, but you won't see the stitches on the front of the piece, and so that just gives you a different look, right? So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. In this particular block, do you guys remember this guy from February? This is the Birdhouse. So I've been playing with my Birdhouse, and I did fusible wings over here, and I did a little bit of top stitching. I also gave it a little butterfly body, and I'm not quite done. I'm going to add a little bit more applique. I gave him a sun that I did using the smooth edge method. This one, the little roof, I used the starch method. And this particular little mushroom, I stuffed him with a little bit of batting, and I used the starch method for this guy. Now this little artichoke, you guys watched me do some needle turn on that, and that's what the little needle turn artichoke looks like, and he's very flat, right? And so is this one. This was the starch method, and this ends up very, very flat because I was able to just quickly top stitch all the way around, and that created a nice smooth edge applique that will not fray along these edges. And so if I turn it to the side, you can see that the edge is turned under. This is top stitched on top. And so no matter how many times I wash this, those edges will not fray, okay? And I have a question. Instead of washing it, is it okay to hit the fabric with some steam before using it for applique? The reason I wash it is for three reasons. Number one, when you do not wash your applique fabric and you put it in a quilt, it will pucker a lot more than if you wash it. So if I want my applique to stay looking like this is right now, wash after wash after wash, I'm going to want to pre-wash not only all of my small pieces but also my background, because that means I have pre-shrunk my fabric. The other reason that I wash my applique fabric is because it keeps it from bleeding. So if I have this red and it were to bleed into this yellow or even into this white, it would prevent that from bleeding. Now there's things on the market such as Retain or Synthropol, and you can use that to prevent stuff from bleeding, but I don't like it when I spend this much time working on a piece and for it to bleed. So that's the other reason. The third reason is the fabric is softer, so when you wash it, it's extremely soft, and so it just makes it more pliable when you want to turn it, especially if you're needle turning it, or if you're using the method that I'm going to show you today, because it just makes it softer and easy to work with. And those are the three reasons why I like to pre-wash my applique fabric. Now, I don't always do that when I'm piecing. There's a lot of times I just use jelly rolls. I pull them straight out of the package, I start sewing, and off to the races I go. So I don't always pre-wash. But when I'm doing applique and I want to keep the shape of my applique intact wash after wash, then I do pre-shrink my fabric. Does anybody else have any questions about applique? And so this was February, and this was the starch method. So if you didn't watch that one, go back to February and watch that episode so that you know how I did the little birdhouse, right, for starch method. So let's talk about smooth edge. So starch method was one method of smooth edge, right? Another method of smooth edge is this here, where you use a basting method, right, where you take a form. In this case, I did the little plastic mylar, and I create a shape that I can now applique either by machine or by hand. So I can do either way, right? But let's talk about other methods. One of the methods that you have probably seen in a few places is this method right here, which is called the interfacing method. And so in this method, you take a little bit of lightweight interfacing, such as this. It can be fusible with little bumps or non-fusible without bumps. In this case, this is a little bit of ground, right? And I just took this fusible, right, bumpy side to pretty side. So I took my fabric and I laid the pretty side of the fabric against the bumpy side, and I stitched all the way around the shape, and then I trimmed it with my pinking shears. So these are mine. Do you guys go to retreats and put your name on your scissors so that they come back to you? That's what I always do. And so once you take that and you stitch all the way around, you're going to remove the excess with pinking shears. Then you're going to pinch, and then you're going to flip that over. So I'm going to stick my hand in there. I'm going to pull that out. I'm going to use something with a rounded tip, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to turn it. I'm not going to press it because this has fusible. So now the bumps are to the outside. And so the pretty side is now facing up. And so I'm going to take, after I stitch the interfacing, I cut a little section of the middle of the interfacing. And because this is fusible and I don't want to fuse it right now, I could take my finger and just finger press that down. The other thing that I could do to this right now is I could take a mist of water. So if you have a misting bottle that looks like this, I got this at a hair salon for $3.99. And I'm going to take and I'm going to mist this on the front with a little bit of water, and then I'm going to press it down with my hands, and then I'm going to set it aside to dry, and when I get ready to press it down and fuse it to my background, I'm ready to fuse. And this has a little bit of glue because this is interfacing, fusible interfacing, and this piece is now ready to go. I can do two things. I could fuse this in place in a couple of places and then stitch it down by hand, or I could fuse it in place and then top stitch it with my machine about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. But this is how I prepare my pieces. So my little piece of ground would go right on my background. This is my background that I use for all my pieces, which is 12.5 vertical by 10.5 this way. And I could center that now. And the first thing that I would do is I would probably just pin it in place with my little tiny applique pins that I can iron. And these are called Dritz dipped pins, so you can iron right on top of these. They're little tiny pins with glass tops. And I could pin that in place until I'm ready to fuse or sew it down. Another reason why I wash is because if that were a fabric that were bleeding and I misted it with a little bit of water, that might start to bleed onto my background. So those are all the reasons why I prefer to pre-wash. And then I'm just going to measure. That looks like it's a little bit off, so I'm going to slide that down. And I always kind of check. So there I have it, right? I have the little piece of dirt or grass. I get it all situated. It's a little bit stretchy, and that's okay, because I'm going to come back and I'm going to play with it. So that is my grass, right? So I have my two little shoes because my baby gnome is going to be sitting here. Florin is going to be sitting right there. I'm not going to remove those until I'm ready to sew them down. And now I'm going to show you a different type of background. In this case, I took the brim of the hat and I used what's called a shape flex. So this is a type of fabric, like an interfacing fabric. People often use this in the collars of shirts, but it's like a woven cotton that has little bit of glue attached to it, and it's a fusible as well. And so just like the little grass, I took and I drew the outline. I did a single needle stitch, very tight stitches, and then I'm just going to come in with my pinking shears, and I'm going to get as close as I can to that stitch line without cutting it, because I don't want those pieces of fabric to fray. You could also do this with wash away interfacing. There's some interfacing that will wash away, or stabilizer. So if you feel like using that material, or that's what you have on hand, you can do that as well. And I'm going to cut, like I said, as close to that edge as I can without cutting in there. And so I'm going to come in and clean it up with a slightly smaller applique scissor, or a slightly smaller scissor, so I can come in and I can cut a little nip here, maybe a little tiny nip right there. And then I'm going to come in and do little tiny nips, just little tiny ones along here, so that it will lay nice and smooth and flat. Okay. And like I said, this is called a woven interfacing. This is called a non-woven interfacing. But the method for both of these is still the same. Where did I buy Mylar? I ordered it online, friends. I ordered that heat resistant, this Mylar here. I ordered it online. It's called No Melt Mylar Template Plastic. And I love it because you can iron right on top of it. And it's great for applique. Okay, so I've taken the woven interfacing, right? Let me snip this right here where it curves. And now I'm going to split this out. Remember, I did pretty side to bumpy side. So if it has glue, you put the pretty side and the bumpy side touching, right? So I'm going to pinch that apart. Can you see my hands? And I'm going to take this, as soon as I can pinch it apart, and I'm going to cut a little slit in there. Hang on a second. I don't want to lick my fingers, but if I have to, I will. Does anybody have any questions about interfacing, about what to do with your shapes? All right, so I'm going to take these little sharp scissors and I'm going to stick that in there. There we go. And now, just like that other shape, I'm going to take and I'm going to cut through only one layer, which is the interfacing. And I'm going to cut enough that it allows me to turn my shape freely. Right, so I'm going to put a little slit. And now I'm going to use this little tool here. It's called a bodkin. You use it to put elastic inside of waistbands, but it has a nice flat side and a little rounded end. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to take and I'm going to push this in so that it's flipped inside out. Push it down like this. You can use a chopstick if you have it. Anything that will allow you to push that so that the pretty side is to the outside will work. Like that. And then you want to use a very, very tight stitch. When I stitch this, I don't use 2.5, I use 2.0, and sometimes I use even smaller, like a 1.9 on my sewing machine. Also known as like 15 stitches to an inch is 2.5, so you're going to want to use like 18 or 19 stitches to the inch. There you go. I'm flipping that the other way. And I'm going to be giving this little piece of applique some shape. And the reason it's called smooth edge is because unlike Fusible that has a raw edge, the edge that faces the outside edges of your piece are going to be very smooth, and so there's not going to be any raw fabric exposed. You guys can see by flipping it the other way, I'm giving this one a smooth edge that I can sew down and pin in place. And this is tricky, right? So the smaller the pieces, the harder it is. If the piece is too small, oftentimes what I will do is instead of using this method, I will simply needle turn it because it's easier. And if you're struggling with it like I was, because sometimes that happens, I always use my cute little lady tweezers and go in there and I grab my fabric and I pull it out. All right. So as you can see, I'm giving that shape. And this is the little brim of his little hat, and you see all of this sticking out, right? I like this method of applique because this method of applique is very dimensional. So a lot of times when you have Fusible, it can look kind of flat against the surface. And this particular type of applique allows you to create an applique piece that is very, very, very smooth, but also very dimensional. I'm taking a little piece of bamboo, a little bamboo chopper, and I'm just taking that edge and I'm going along that edge and I'm making that as smooth as possible. Now this is where my little wooden ironing board comes in handy, and I'll go get it. Those of you that have watched me before know that I have this little handy dandy wooden ironing board, and I like it because all of a sudden I can lay this on here and I can take and I can put a little pressure on there with my hand, and I can shape my pieces so that the only thing that's to the front is my little pretty fabric. And you won't see this interfacing once I sew it down. The only thing that interfacing is doing is holding the edges of my fabric and keeping them turned to the inside so that what you see on the outside is nothing but smooth edges. Remember, this is smooth edge applique. And let me put a little piece of interfacing there so you can see it. So what that does is that enables me to have just a smooth edge only. And like I said, if you're wrestling with a piece like this one because it's got a curve, you can take a tiny bit of water, roll that back, use your thumbs, and what that will do is it will literally iron it in place, and it'll allow the little piece to dry, and then you'll be ready to iron that. And so now I can take and I can pin that in place, and let me show you what it looks like. Would Pellon 101 do for this? It depends. I'm not familiar with that particular one. I have, what I use for mine is Shape Flex. I use, let me see, where's my bolt? Here. This is a P44F Fusible, because I buy it by the bolt, so I have an entire thing of Fusible. And it's what's called apparel interfacing. And so you can use any type of interfacing as long as it's soft and flexible like this one. The thinner the interfacing, the harder it is to work with. So I tend to stick with a sheer weight, or a lightweight, but not a mid-weight. Okay. The grass applique shape that I'm using is the same one that's in the December pattern. So if you want to know what applique shape I'm using the same one that came with the tree, the large pine tree. So I'm just reusing that same one. And so I'm just taking this, and now I've taken my shape, and I could pin it to a board like this one, right? I could pin it here and let it dry for a little bit, which I do sometimes. So I just take a few pins and I stick them in my board. If you wanted to give it a shot of starch while you're letting them dry, at this point you could give it a tiny bit of starch or use some Teriyol or anything like that, you could. And so really I'm just shaping my little applique shapes the way I want, and I'm going to let it sit here for just a few. And so I just pin it, and I'm literally just kind of wrestling with it a little bit the way I want. And then I'll go work on another shape. Okay? This grass here is what somebody asked. That's the same grass as under the pine tree. And that was in a previous pattern. Okay, so I have the shoes, I have the grass, and now I have the brim of the hat. So let's talk about yet another type of backing that you could put for smooth edge. So in this case here, this is the little hat, right? You can see the stitching. I left the bottom open because that's going to be covered by something else. The brim, right? So the little brim is going to cover this edge, so I left it open for turning. And I took it and I stitched it onto just very lightweight muslin. So this is a bleached muslin. So if that's what you have in your sewing room, you can test that out. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm simply going to take my pinking shears and I'm going to cut as close as I can. So if you noticed, I took that muslin and I stitched it pretty sides together, right? Pretty side to pretty side. This is a solid. You can tell on a solid that one side is bumpier and one side is smoother, especially on Kona, because this is Kona lipstick. And so I put the smooth side of my Kona to the smooth side of my muslin. And so this is non-fusible, so this will not stick. I'm going to have to stick this down with pins to hold it in place while I stitch it down. There we go. So that is number 3, right? Number 1 was fusible interfacing. Number 1 was non-woven. Number 2 was woven, which is like shape flex, which is like fabric, like this, right? This is woven because you can see the weave. And then this is just using a lightweight muslin. Okay? Somebody said, I have trouble turning small pieces. I would not turn really teeny tiny pieces. If you notice, my grass is pretty big, right? The brim of the hat is pretty wide. I'm not doing this with little teeny tiny pieces because this method does not work well for little tiny pieces. For tiny pieces, I would use needle turn like I did here because you can do needle turn on very, very small pieces, okay? So there's the hat, right? I'm leaving this side open because that's going to get covered up by this brim, so it doesn't matter that that's not done. And then I'm going to have to trim that off just a hair because it's a little bit wider than what the pattern calls for, and so I want it to fit correctly, and so I'm going to trim this inside out just a hair more. And I'm going to remove the pins that I used when I sewed it. I stitched it down. And I'm going to come in here, and when there's curves, I'm going to clip just a hair, not all the way to the stitch line, but just clip just a hair so that they turn better. So I'm going to do the convex and the concave, which means the inner and the outer curves. All right. Like I said, not too close. All right, I'm almost done. And now I can take this there's a little bit of bulk. Do you see how much stuff is at the top? So I'm probably going to come in and trim that across there and just get as close as I can, but not cut my stitches so that this will be smooth at the tip of the little hat. You can come in here, like I said, you can poke it. If you have arthritis in your hands, like I do in mine, sometimes this is a little bit painful, especially if I'm having a rheumatoid arthritis flare. And so I don't do as much smooth edge as I would like to. But this is a great technique, especially if you're appliquing large things. You could use this method to actually applique an entire Dresden plate onto a quilt that was large, if you had large circles. So this works great with big, smooth pieces, but you can still do it with medium-sized applique pieces if you wanted to. So as you can see, I'm getting his little hat now, the shape of his hat. And because this is on muslin or essentially fabric, and this has been pre-washed, I could actually go ahead and just iron it, and I think I will. So I'm going to take this here, and I'm going to lay this, and this is metal, so it doesn't matter. Bring my iron over here. This is my big guy. And I'm going to take and I'm going to push it out with my metal bodkin and run that metal bodkin along that edge, just like that. And I'm going to spritz it with water. Why do I spritz it with water? Is because when you spritz it with water, all of a sudden your fabric becomes very stretchy and very malleable. When I do applique, I use a lot of water. When I do piecing, I use just a hot, dry iron. I do not add a bunch of water or starch when I'm piecing, and that's because I don't want my pieces to stretch. But when I'm appliquing, it's okay if they get wet a tiny bit so that I can get those edges smooth. And look at that. I like how this hat is looking. This hat has a little bit of a curve here, so I'm going to make sure I push it out so that it has the shape that I want it to have. Right? I want it to keep its shape. And what I want is for the white interfacing to be facing the back and for the red to be facing the front without any excess fabric in there. And look at there. It's getting the shape that I wanted, just like that. It's getting this little curve. Can you see the little hat? It's starting to curve now. So that little hat is keeping his wave. Somebody said, why do you use the scissors? The reason I use these scissors, which are pinking shears, is because this keeps it from fraying, and because I'm cutting it very close and it has almost no seam allowance, very small seam allowance, then it keeps that fabric from fraying. And that's why I use pinking shears for this technique. Okay. So you can see that little head is now getting the shape that I want it to have. I can press this some more. And I can take the other side of the hat now. I can press it. And now it's really, really flat and it's totally smooth edge. And the reason, like I said, it's smooth edge is because that raw seam is now to the inside. And so this is the little top of the hat. I have lots of fuzzies. I have the brim of the hat. And because this has Fusible on it, this piece right here, I could actually take parchment paper, which I will, just like that, and I could lay this piece on top the way I want it to lay, and I could actually add a little bit of heat to that, and I could fuse that together to make a composite. So now this piece is fused to itself, right? But not to a background. So I could now take this and I would be ready to either hand stitch this hat into place, right? Or I could stitch right here from this end to this end before I stitched it down, or I could wait until later. And so now this piece is ready to go for my little gnome. But what about his beard, right? His beard is very hard, and how are we going to do the little beard? So let me show you. Let's see what I did with my little piece of beard that was sitting here. Don't you love when you have all of your pieces laid out and then something falls? Did it hit the ground? I don't know. I had it right here. Ah, here it is. It slid under my sewing machine. So now I have the beard, right? And in this particular case, Floren's beard is kind of jaggedy, but it comes to a point. And so because this method doesn't allow for a bunch of jaggedy edges, I made the beard smooth. I put him with interfacing. I turned him just like I did the other pieces, and now his beard is ready to go, and I can attach this one on top. This little beard's going to have a bow, and so when I get ready to sew it down, I'm going to bring it in just a hair, and I'm going to sew it down this way, right? Does anybody have questions so far? Hey everybody. What turning tool am I using? This is called a bodkin. And a bodkin is like $3 or $4. It's not very expensive on Amazon. And it's metal. It has a rounded tip like this. It's like a ball. And then on this side, it's flat. And you can use elastic to run elastic through a pair of pants when it falls out. Okay, so now you can see how I'm building my little guy. This right here, I would just pin it together with my little tiny applique pins. And this entire piece is now ready for me to either sew down by machine. And I don't know if you guys can see that. There it goes. So now this little piece is ready for me to sew down either by machine or by hand. And that's how I would build my gnome. His nose would get attached just like his shoe, right? I would use a little piece of either cardboard or plastic, baste around it, and put his nose in there, because what I don't want is for his nose to get left off. So he needs a little nose. So this is how I would start to build my smooth edge applique. Does anybody have any questions so far about what I've done? So this is how you turn them with either cardboard or mylar, and this is how you turn the pieces if you're using either woven or non-woven interfacing. This is with muslin, the hat, and this is with interfacing, but either way, you trace the pattern onto the muslin, and I'm going to show you how I do that, and then you sew it, right? So pretty sides. I'll show you what I did before you guys got here. So this is the pretty side of the fabric. This is the interfacing. This has a bumpy side. So the bumpy side goes to the pretty side of the fabric, like this. The interfacing is thin, so you don't even need a light box to trace. So I need his blue shirt, right? So I'm going to take and I'm going to lay that right here. And with a pencil, big fat pencil, little pencil, doesn't matter. I'm just going to go like this. And this is my sewing line, what I'm tracing on here. The beard goes over this edge. So if I wanted to, I could leave this edge open for turning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to sew like this, but I'm going to leave a section here open for turning, and I'm going to show you how that's done. So this is how I prepared it, right? I just traced it onto my interfacing, This is a bumpy side and a smooth side. I can just take my scissors here. I put this right sides together. I'm going to take and I'm going to feel for the direction of the bias of the fabric, and I'm going to place this so that I have some bias. And the reason I want that is so that the pieces are easier to shape. Right? So I'm going to give it some space. I'm going to put a couple of pins. Actually, I need little pins, not big ones. And then I'm going to sew it really quick. And then this piece will be ready to go. Does anybody have any questions so far about what I've shared? Yeah, bodkins are beautiful. And somebody said, do I need notches? You don't need a lot of notches. I just find that it's much smoother if I put notches. So this is how I prepared my pieces, right? I took the bias side. This is washed, as you can tell, I'm very flexible. This is interfacing that has a woven interfacing that has a little bit of a fusible to it, a lightweight fusible. And now let me switch my camera angle so you can see me stitch it down on my baby sewing machine here. Turn that on. If we haven't pre-washed so far, should we start over? Will our work be ruined when we wash? No, if you did not pre-wash your fabric, one of the things that you can do is you can wash your quilt on cold and then don't put it in the dryer. You can lay out a quilt on a big tarp and let it air dry. Or you can dry it on ultra low. I wouldn't really worry about starting all the way over. If you did fusible, then your quilt should be fine. It doesn't shrink up as much. But for me, if I'm doing needle turn applique or smooth edge applique, I always wash. And it depends on what I'm going to do with it. This is going to be a wall hanging. So most of this up here is not pre-washed, and it doesn't matter because it won't get washed a lot. Okay. It says, somebody said use color catchers when you wash your quilt for the first time. I do not recommend color catchers necessarily because color catchers only do what they say, catch the dye. What I rather do is set the dye. So if you can buy something called Retain and put your quilt in a tub, and you mix the Retain in accordance to the manufacturer's instructions. You pour as hot a water as you can get in there with the Retain. It will set the color and your quilt will never bleed. You will never need a color catcher. You can also do that with blue jeans or your clothing, like a red shirt. You put it in a bucket with hot water and Retain, and that will prevent the dyes from bleeding. It will set the dyes permanently. So I don't use color catchers, I use Retain instead. And I do that in my tub or in a bucket because an HE washing machine, you're not supposed to use that. So that's what I do, and then I rinse it out really good, then I wring it out, and then I put it in my washing machine. Okay, but that was a good question. All right, so I've got my little blue shirt. I've got him traced on here. I'm leaving a space for an opening that's going to be trapped under his beard, so it doesn't matter. And I'm going to come over here to my machine and I'm going to stitch it. So let me show you what my full view is. All right. So I got my little sewing machine over here. And I'm simply going to take using, I have it set 19 stitches per inch for my little featherweight. She's my little friend. And I'm going to sew directly on the line that I just drew. Straight on top of the line, right? Always pivot with your needle down. And then I'm just going to come back a little ways. And then I'm going to back tack just a hair. And then this one is done. I'm going to switch it back so you can see it. And then I will just remove my pins. And take this and I will cut really close to that sewn edge with my pinking shears. And like I said, this is just one method of applique. There's another method of applique that we're going to be learning later, and that's called a back-basted method. And that's a type of needle turn where you baste the shape onto the background and then sew it that way. And that produces some really smooth shapes, and you can get a lot of detail with that type of applique. And so if you want to learn a back-basted method, that will be later on in another lesson. Like I said, there's dozens of ways of doing applique. And so I'm teaching you as many different methods. You don't have to do them all. They're really just for you to have the knowledge base and then decide, do I want to do one of these methods, all of these methods? I think it's better to be consistent on one quilt, but I'm just showing you how to do it all different kinds of ways, right? And you decide which way works best for you based on the supplies that you can get in your area, based on your level of expertise and comfort. You want to do what works for you, not what works for me, okay? Does anybody have any questions about what I have shown you so far? Like I said, if you want to grab fabric, just grab some tweezers and pull it out. A hemostat works if you have one of those, but this works better with bigger pieces. Hi from Louisville. Hi, Brenda. Anybody else out there? I just want to thank you guys for coming and for being so supportive. When I started this journey, I wasn't sure if anybody was going to come to our live streams. All I knew is that I had created a bunch of patterns, and I thought, wow, these are really cute. I want to share them with my friends. And well, here we are, right? This has reached much further than I ever imagined. I didn't know so many gnome lovers were out there. I'm definitely a gnome lover. I discovered recently that the largest collection of gnomes is in England, so now it's on my bucket list. I want to go see the largest collection of gnomes in England. So I have to go, friends. I definitely have to go. Okay. So as you can see, I'm just pushing that little bodkin in there, and I'm shaping it. And now this little guy has a small raw edge right there. That doesn't matter because that one's going to get tucked up under the beard. And like I said, I can just take, and with this particular method, you can use a tiny bit of water. Like I said, this is a hair mister from the beauty supply store, and I paid like $3. You see them sometimes in quilt shops for a ton of money, but I bought mine at the hair supply store, and it's just a hair mister. All right, so there we have it. Look, there's the body, right? I can put the little body on there now. I've got the little feet. I can take him out of there. After I give him a little press, he looks like he didn't press up very well. So for this particular guy, I'm going to pull him tight again. And I'm going to give him a little press. I'm using the big iron today because I was ironing a lot of fabric that I pre-washed. I'm going to take that mylar out of there. And baby shoes are ready. I could pin those in place. And now I have the little body because he's sitting on the ground, right? The little gnome. I decided the little shoe doesn't go there, so I'm going to put him this way. And the other little shoe, of course, I'm going to trim all this stuff off after he's been stitched into place. And I have the other little shoe that I'm going to pin into place. And now I could take this with me to the soccer field or the baseball field or wherever it is that my grandkids are hanging out. And I could actually I could take this to the park and I could sit there and I could hand stitch all of these pieces once I'm done with this particular step. And so this is a great technique for, like I said, larger pieces. It doesn't work well with little tiny pieces. And if you notice, I didn't do this to the other beards because the other beards had too many jaggedy edges. This one's fairly smooth. So this beard was easy to do for this method. If you have a spiky beard like this, then you're either going to want to do a fusible like this beard right here, or you're going to want to do a back-basted needle turn method, which I will teach later. Somebody said, am I removing the template? Yes, I removed the template out of the shoe, so there's only fabric left. And so then all these little guys are ready to stitch down. I need his nose, and then I could put either one of the trees, but in this case, I'm going to put 2 flowers because this little baby gnome is sitting in a flower bed. And so this is how I'm going to finish Florin, and I'm going to put his little snail friend right beside him. All right, friends, if anybody has any questions, this is your chance to ask. We've been together almost an hour now, so let me know. If you have no other questions, I just want to thank you for watching. If you have friends who would like to learn how to applique, I'm teaching a different method every single month. The reason I'm teaching a different method is because this is a skill builder series. And so every month I build a new block. My quilt is going to have 20 blocks, but you can do whatever you want with these. You can put them on pillows, you can make table runners, you make wall hangings, you can make a big diorama of a quilt. So you can use whatever you want with these little guys. I just love gnomes, and I hope that you're enjoying this series. This was a lesson on different ways to do smooth edge applique. I appreciate your help and support. Don't forget to like and subscribe the channel. I hope you enjoy time with your family. The weather's getting nice, and I hope you have a wonderful Easter. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Bye, friends. I'll see you guys later. Don't forget to check the website. I have some new bonus content. I have a bonus mushroom, and I have a palm tree. Bye, everybody. I love you guys. Bye-bye. Carol, the grass is in a different pattern. I'll put the link on the Facebook page, Carol. Bye. Thank you.